Hi, this is John Morris with Cole Banker Bullard. I'm today talking to you about buyer brokerage agreement. The first thing you should do is print it out and read it. Read it in its entirety. The second thing I want to talk to you about is why it's important. What I think is that it sets expectations between not only what you are going to do for the buyer, but also what the buyer is going to do for you. For example, it sets the expectation that the buyer is going to be available for showings. It's going to be responsive to you when you contact them to set up those showings and for contracts and other documents that you might need, as well as to the lender to make sure that they're going to be doing the things that they need to be doing to get that loan. But it also outlines the expectations that the buyer should have of you, and that is to help locate the property, to comply with all laws that are going to govern the sale, as well as make any required disclosures to that buyer. It also is important as a professional service to be able to explain your services as well as your values to that buyer. So in today's age, that buyer can find the property for you. You don't have an exclusive access to those MLS listings. They can go to Zillow, Realtor.com, all of those other sites. What you need to be doing is focusing on how you're going to help them in the transaction outside of just putting in search parameters and saying, here, let's go look at this. I've got an MLS key. You need to be providing the extra services as far as communication, negotiations, as well as protecting them throughout the contract. And then probably the most important aspect of the buyer brokerage agreement is that as soon as you are advising that client in any way, be it on price, on terms, on the condition of the property, on the area or the neighborhood, what's going on, you have created an agency relationship. BBA is the law that governs agency relationships in Georgia, and that requires all agency relationships to be in writing. Therefore, as soon as you start advising that client, you should have your agency agreement in writing. Many times agents have complained that the largest obstacle to getting the buyer brokerage agreement signed up front is the fact that it guarantees the broker a fee. Yes, it does. However, the next line states that the seller is going to pay the listing broker the commission, and then the listing broker will then share the commission with the selling broker. It's not a bad idea, just in your practices, in your buyer presentation, which will be another video down the road, to explain, to have that language from that listing agreement there so that the buyer can understand what the seller has agreed to do already, and that all the homes that you show are going to include a co-op somewhere in the listing agreement. Go ahead and show it to them, explain it to them your process. It's always better to make everybody aware of the circumstances of the sale up front, rather than to let them figure it out at the closing table as to what your value to them is. Right. The next section of the buyer brokerage agreement that tends to trip a lot of people up is the retainer fee. Now, our company does not typically charge a retainer fee. I would talk to your individual office broker about retainer fees for example, commercial buyers, or those that are going to be a long-term. But typically, in almost all circumstances, you can mark that with a 0. As far as best practices go, there is a buyer services guarantee that you can guarantee your service to that buyer client. That is available at your office. It is a very useful tool. And I would also highly recommend any kind of buyer consultation meeting prior to putting them in the car or meeting them at a property. That way you can discuss your requirements as far as earnest money, what our policy is for holding the earnest money, and being able, as well as offering the buyer services guarantee, and explain to them the difference between them being your client and your customer, and the value-added service that you're going to provide to them from being your client rather than just your customer. One very important aspect of doing that and having a set routine in doing that is that it then protects you from any kind of discrimination. Because if you're doing the same thing for one buyer versus another, no one could ever say you gave any other buyer preferential treatment over another. That's it. That's buyer brokerage agreement. Get it signed up front. Don't wait till the contract.